Hello, everybody. Sorry for the little bit of a late start. We had a little technical difficulty. Welcome to the LTD System Review Open House. We had another one earlier this morning. We'll have a couple more in the following week, so we'll send out invitations for those as well. My name is Jeremy Card. I'm a planner with LTD. I'm the project manager for the system review. And tonight we're going to be going over the system recommendations that were developed through an outreach process and with Nelson Nygaard and LTD staff. I'm going to hand it over to Thomas Whitman, who's going to lead us through a presentation and go through the changes. If you have questions during the presentation, go ahead and use the question and answer button, and we will try to get to those questions as soon as we can. But I'm going to let Thomas take it away and get started.
All right, great. Thank you so much for tuning in for this. I've got a short presentation, and then again the opportunity to provide comments or feedback on some of the things that you may have heard. Just for there at the bottom of your screen there is a Q&A function that we are monitoring throughout the presentation, and we'll read those out and give you a response to those as best as we can. So, please, if you do have a question or comment, please utilize that. We look forward to hearing back from you. I want to start off with what are we going to be talking about today? Talking a little bit about the background of how we got to here, what some of the recommendations might be. We call them service scenarios. And then ultimately, how can you respond, and what are ways that you can respond and help us understand what some of the priorities are that we should be looking at when we implement potential changes. I want to start off by saying, why are we doing what we call a system review? There are several different reasons. First of all, the COVID-19, the pandemic changed how we travel, where we travel to, and how people are traveling. And so the big question comes, is LTD's service design and where the routes go, does that still meet the needs of the traveling public? One of the other big questions was that not necessarily specifically due to the pandemic, but as a result of it, there have been staffing shortages for both operators, the bus drivers, as well as maintenance staff. And this has not allowed LTD to fully restore the full amount of service that existed in 2019 before the pandemic. Right now, LTD is operating about 90% of pre-pandemic service levels. And so what this means is that the system review looks at where are people traveling to and from? Does that match what LTD should be doing? As well as providing a roadmap for how to bring back service or put back service in a way that matches today's travel patterns and ultimately helps improve mobility for all residents of the region. We didn't do this in a vacuum. We looked at a series of different elements to help us understand what the strengths and opportunities of the existing services are and what the travel markets are within the area. For instance, we looked at the ridership and routings at a stop level, trip level, and by weekday, Saturday, Sunday for every single route to help us understand where are existing riders going. We also looked at what the overall travel pattern was within the region using location-based services, which is in essence cell phone data that allows us to see where people are traveling to and from, not just folks that are using the bus, but everyone. And this allows us to see how travel patterns match up with LTD's ridership patterns. We also looked at population employment data to help us understand where existing higher density areas are. And we also looked at where certain socioeconomic factors come into play. Where do folks live that don't necessarily have that have zero vehicles? Where do folks from different ethnicities live? Where do low income folks live? Again, trying to understand where those highest need areas are, those folks that truly need the service. Are they being served right now? And are they being served with the appropriate level of service? We didn't just look at today's service levels and today's socioeconomics, but we also looked at where's growth anticipated to happen, so that anything we might do today can feed into that potential growth in the future. The last thing that we did in terms of that helped us develop these series of recommendations was to have a first round of public input, where we went and talked with existing customers. We did an onboard survey. We did focus groups with a series of folks. We had intercept meetings or tabling events at community events to help understand how do people use LTD now and what will get them to use the service more often. So these factors all came into play when we looked at developing a series of service scenarios. And the key improvements that we see as a part of the service scenarios are to improve route frequency. This was the thing we heard the most, is like, we'd like to see our service be more frequent. And the question for us then was, how do we do that? One of the things we saw when we looked at the service network was route duplication, routes running on top of each other, and in some cases, buses running back to back for miles on end. How could we begin reducing something like that? We also heard about weekend service and how important it is, and that folks wanted to see an improvement in weekend service. And then also there was a desire to connect new growing areas to service as well. Now, several years ago, there was a process that was, that looked in depth at the LTD service network and made wholesale changes. This is not that process. The system review is designed to take a look at the strengths of the existing service and build upon those strengths so that it better aligns with where today's community, where folks are traveling to and from. We're not starting from scratch. We're building upon the existing network. And you'll see that as we go through some of the recommendations. We have two different sets of recommendations. One of them we call short-term recommendations. These could happen within the next year. These typically do not require additional operators or additional buses or additional operating hours. So these are things that we can do immediately. We don't have enough operators right now to operate the full set of service. What can we do in the meantime? How can we improve service in the meantime to enhance mobility while we're waiting for those additional graduating classes to come on board? Some of the things that we looked at that are the key priorities in the short term are the top priority is restoring the MX and Route 11's service levels to what they were beforehand. These were the most frequent routes. These were the highest ridership routes. These are the routes that form the backbone of your system, and that most people, if they are making a connection, transfer to or from one of these two routes. In addition to that, we wanted to set up additional high-frequency corridors that have service every 15 minutes or better on weekdays. Why is this important? National research and LTD experience too has shown that a bus every 15 minutes does not require a schedule. It also eases connections at Eugene Station and Springfield Station, as there's more vehicles you're providing more options for more buses to come in, because not everything comes into these transfer points at the same time. And how do we enhance those connections and make it easier for our traveling public as a result? The three corridors that we'd be looking at from this are on River Road between Eugene Station and Santa Clara Station, on Coburg Road between Harlow and downtown and Eugene Station, and then also between Eugene Station, University of Oregon, and 30th and Hilliard. I'll talk about each of these corridors in a little bit more detail when we have the specific recommendations. But three additional corridors with high frequency service on weekdays to supplement the existing MX and Route 11 services. In the long term, the idea is to reach pre-pandemic service levels. And this doesn't mean just put everything back how it was beforehand, but if LTD was operating, let's say 100,000 hours of service in 2019, our target should be 100,000 hours of service reinvested in a way that matches today's travel patterns. This does require additional buses, it does require additional operators, and does require additional operating hours. And what it also means is that everything you see on the list in front of you is not something that can happen today or in the next year. It requires additional operators. And as those operators become available and those resources become available, we can implement these recommendations. And so the recommendations, what are they? It's, the first one is improve frequency as additional operators become available. And this is to fill in trips that were removed as a result of the operator shortage, such as Route 40, Route 24, Route 28. In the mid-morning, all have times when trips are pulled out of that schedule. And so this is an opportunity to restore some of those trips to there. It's also an opportunity to create 3 new high-frequency corridors, along West 18th, MLK and Centennial, and Highway 99. These, so this will improve connectivity and opportunities, for a much larger audience and a much larger market in Springfield and Eugene. We're also looking at an additional circulator, improve downtown circulation in downtown Eugene with, more buses at more times, not necessarily a bunch of buses following each other, but spreading things out to allow the existing service to provide better connectivity, as well as looking at a downtown circulator and options for a downtown circulator that can improve inter-downtown mobility. One of the things we also heard as a part of our outreach, specifically from our responses from Latino groups, was that rural services need to be enhanced. And as a part of the long-term recommendations, we're looking at adding trips back to rural destinations. One of the other things we heard was that access to certain areas was important. And at the same time, 40-foot buses in certain neighborhood streets can be challenging to operate and may not necessarily be as safe as it could be. So how do we serve some of those higher need areas in areas where a 40-foot bus might not necessarily be the answer? LTD is working together with local partners to provide to develop a mobility management framework that looks at what are those options, whether it's smaller vehicles, individual mobility such as bikes and scooters, to understand what are our options for providing mobility in these harder to reach areas, again, and being flexible with what that might look like, because a 40-foot bus is not necessarily always the answer to mobility. One of the last things in the recommendations is to understand that in order for service to work effectively, there must be capital investments that help it, whether it means different changes in some of the existing stations or transit centers to help with movement, or to make spot improvements to shelters, stop locations, or to assist with speed and reliability to help buses move faster and stay on time. By improving the capital facilities and improving the customer experience, we can attract more people to use the service throughout this. I want to give an example of what the high frequency network could look like. And this is service every 15 minutes or more during weekdays. So one of the ways that, one of the starts for this is that we start, this is today's network, and it includes the MX and Route 11, which are the only 2 routes that operate every 15 minutes or more, on a weekday. And if we look at the short-term recommendations, we see how, 3 additional corridors supplement this network, including, going up River Road, going up Coburg Road, and then coming out to U of O and down all the way to 30th and Hilliard. And if we look at the long term, these are the purple lines. You see 3 additional corridors going out MLK Centennial, West 18th, as well as SR 99 that create a network of high frequency service throughout the region. I want to add too that these alignments, these corridors, are the ones that the cities of Eugene and Springfield have identified for their high frequency network, and they're planning for more frequent bus service along these corridors. And we're looking at this process to try to take a step in that direction. There's also, in addition to, some routing changes, there's some frequency changes we want to look at as a part of this. In the short term, multiple routes, we're looking at having frequency improvements, including the MX, Route 11, the 24, the 28, 36, and, looking at a, almost doubling of service levels on Route 81 to operate every 30 minutes, with a corresponding reduction in the service levels in Route 82. Both of these, routes, serve the Eugene Station to the community college, and we're looking at emphasizing one and de-emphasizing the other in line with some of the ridership demand that we're seeing. In the long term, we're also looking at frequency improvements for a series of additional routes, including Route 13, 17, 18, 24, 36, 40, 66, and 67, 81, as well as a series of rural routes to Veneta, Mackenzie Bridge, Lowell, Junction City, and Cottage Grove. So this is, a brief summary of, some of the high-level improvements that we see as a part of this planning effort. And I want to briefly pause right here and ask if there's, if folks can use the Q&A to see if there's any specific route that you might be interested in, or, we can walk through every single recommendation that we have as a part of this. So this is, again, your opportunity to, help us tailor this presentation to what you'd like to hear.
Thomas, I'm going to go ahead and just allow them to talk. If they would like, they'd have to raise their hand, please, and go ahead and ask your question if you have them. Otherwise, we can move on. I think we can go ahead.
All right. Let's hold for a sec. There we go. I go through each one of the different, different recommendations. And I'm going to start, these are all routing recommendations. We saw what some of the frequency recommendations are. And so every one of the alignments that we're going to talk about here is a small change from the existing route structure. And you'll see most of these are quite similar to what's out there right now. So for Route 24, we're looking at two different routing alignment changes. And both of them are intended to improve the speed and reliability of the service. The first is to use Willamette Street between Eugene Station and 20th Avenue instead of Oak. And this will shorten the amount of travel time for inbound passengers into Eugene Station. We're also looking to remove the deviation, the 34th and Pearl Street deviation. This adds a couple of minutes of travel time, and most of the passengers, and there's only a couple, they have the opportunity to walk out to Willamette, to catch this vehicle. And again, this will improve speed and reliability for the majority of existing customers. For Route 28, we're also looking at minor changes in how the U of O's campus is served. Right now, Route 28 and 81 at times leave Eugene Station and travel back to back to University of Oregon, and then they're pretty much back to back traveling down Hilliard all the way down to 30th and Hilliard. And so we're looking at changing the alignment of Route 28 so that it is consistent with Route 81, so that the alignment on Alder and 15th would no longer be served. There's a lot of pedestrian and bike conflicts and parking conflicts too along here. And it's from a reliability and a safety perspective, going up to West 11th to access Patterson after hitting the U of O's campus is a more appropriate way to do this. One of the other things we'd be looking at doing is offsetting the schedule of routes 81 and 28 so that they'd be 15 minutes apart. so that instead of having two buses going back to back for several miles, they'd be offset by 15 minutes, providing frequent service between 30th and Hilliard, the U of O, as well as downtown, which will attract additional riders, to this area. One of the other short-term changes we're looking at doing is to address some of the regional growth that is happening. At 18th and Willow Creek, there's a series of new higher density apartments or multifamily housing, coming into play and being constructed, or they're open in some cases already. And we looked at this as an opportunity to say, how can we extend an existing service to serve some of the jobs that are also near Willow Creek Road and West 18th, as well as some of the new housing. And so we're looking at extending Route 18 outbound, to Willow Creek, going north, and then, going on West 11th, back towards Seneca Station, Willow Creek Station. What this allows us to do, it's a one-way loop. It allows us to improve coverage, turn the bus around, and at the same time, continue to serve almost every single one of our existing customers along here. Folks may need to cross the street, but by improving access, we believe we can improve the ridership potential of this line as well. Route 41, we're also looking at making changes to reflect lower ridership on certain segments. Specifically on Dynamo, we're looking at there's low ridership on the segment between Royal and West 11th, and we're looking at shifting that service a little bit further to the east, and serving Bertelson instead. There's additional housing there, there's additional jobs there, and this allows us to potentially carry more people with Route 41 on this. Prior to the pandemic, Route 41 also used to serve the Green Hill deviation, and were, due to low ridership and the number of existing customers that are inconvenienced by the additional travel times to pick up very few people, we're recommending not putting back the limited Green Hill deviation. One of the other elements, and this looks a little bit confusing on the map, so I apologize, but is short-term changes to routes 40 and 51. One of the recommendations to create 15-minute service or better between Santa Clara Station and Eugene Station was to combine the alignments of routes 51 and 52. So between those two locations, they are operating on the same alignment, but with schedules that are offset by 15 minutes. So the 51 comes, then 15 minutes later, Route 52 would come. Between River Road and Eugene Station, currently routes 51 and 52 do not have the same alignment. And so the recommendation for this would be to shift Route 51 to serve the identical alignment that Route 52 operates on 2nd Avenue, Blair, and the 5th-6, pair. So this is a place where Route 40 currently also provides service. So be looking at changing Route 40's alignment so that it would travel, from its existing service and use, where Route 51 currently does, which includes Railroad, Washington Street, 3rd Avenue, Shelton McMurphy, and then go also to Shelton McMurphy, East 4th Avenue, Pearl, and High Street. By switching, we're not looking at removing service from existing riders, but by changing the emphasis of where service goes, we can create a high frequency corridor that is easy to understand and will allow for additional customers to have more choices and more connections at Eugene Station. One of the last, short-term changes is Route 52, where, currently it is, it's difficult during certain times to take left turns onto an unsignalized intersection onto Irving, and we'd be looking at using Calais Street and Kalmia Street to get to the light at Kalmia and Irving Road, and so that we can make a protected and safer left turn. It's overall, a little small change, but it can make a difference in how long we wait there and how safe it is for our customers. One of the other short-term changes is to, change several of the rural routes. Route 93, which goes out to Veneta, was shortened when the West MX alignment, was developed. And as we saw from what happened to ridership in comparison to some of the other rural routes, there was a very sharp decline in ridership. And so we're looking at restoring the connection between Veneta and downtown Eugene and Eugene Station by creating a direct connection to those locations. This means that Route 93 would no longer serve the Bertelsen, First Ave, and Seneca, segments, but instead travel, so that there'd be drop-offs only between basically where Seneca State, between Seneca and Eugene Station. And in the outbound direction, we'd only be picking up folks between Eugene Station and Seneca, so that we're not competing with the MX or any of the other routes, but in essence, we're giving the folks from Veneta more access, better access, and more opportunities to connect regionally in a much faster way. The last short-term recommendation is Route 98, which serves Cottage Grove. And we'd be looking at, first of all, right now, several trips serve the community college and several trips do not. We'd be looking at, from a consistency perspective, to have all trips serve the community college so that folks don't necessarily have to look at a schedule, say, is this trip go there or not go there? But instead they have an option of when that, to be able to say every trip goes there and it's easy to understand. In Cottage Grove, we'd be looking, we looked at what the ridership is and what the biggest destination in Cottage Grove is, and it's the Walmart. And currently the only way that the Route 98 serves the Walmart is that if you go all the way around a big loop, travel to Eugene and come back is the only way that you can do this. There is on-demand service in Cottage Grove, but we felt that by allowing for bi-directional service from Cottage Grove residents to the Walmart, we can serve the biggest destination with that, with this alignment. And we'd look at one other small change to improve speed and reliability for this route is to use 4th Street South between Goshen Divide Highway and Taylor Avenue. This speeds things up a little bit for some of the existing customers. But by these small tweaks, we feel like we're adding 2 major destinations to Route 98, which should improve the ridership potential for this line. In the long term, and again, these are the short term are things that typically we can do some of the alignment changes without needing additional operators. The long-term changes we can look at, using additional operators, and each one of these does require additional resources to implement. So that's why they're not in the short term. And so I wanted to walk through some of the key improvements for some of the longer term changes. The first one is to look at routes 66 and 67. These routes currently operate, in a big loop, serving the Valley River Center, as well as, multiple other destinations on Crescent Avenue and Coburg Road. And so the idea behind the recommendations for this is that they currently take during off-peak times, during weekends, during evenings, it takes an hour to do this loop. And during times of higher ridership and higher congestion, it takes more than an hour. Right now, Route 66 and 67 customers can't always make the connections at Eugene Station conveniently all day long. There are certain parts of the day they might have good connections, and other parts of the day they may not. So one of the key things we wanted to look here is like, how can we tighten up the schedule of Route 66 and 67 so that connections at Eugene Station, which is where a significant portion of the ridership of this route has an origin or a destination, how can we make that better? And we wanted to make that better by looking at 2 opportunities to streamline this route. The first one is to look at moving the facility at the Valley River Center from the south side of the mall to the north side of the mall in a new facility. Ridership is very high at VRC. And so we wanted to provide a similar capital facility without the negative impacts of multiple minutes of travel time, sometimes through parking lots that bog Route 66 and 67 down. One of the other elements we'd be looking at is to remove service from Shadow View Drive and instead serve the Winco and the Costco via Coburg Road directly. Concurrently, we'd be looking at extending Route 12 from Shadow View to Coburg Road so that connections between Route 12, 66, and 67 would still be made, and patrons on Route 12 would then have a direct connection to the Winco as well. We feel by doing this, it gives us the opportunity to streamline services, make connections better, and then set Route 66 and 67 up for additional frequency, because we are also looking at improving frequency to every 20 minutes for during the high demand areas and times for Route 66 and 67. One of the other things we identified as a part of this process, and it's been identified by other previous processes as well, is that the connections between Northwest Eugene with multiple other areas. And so in this case, we wanted to extend Route 40 from the Winco, Barger Road to River Road and the Santa Clara Station. This allows us to provide better connectivity to some of the growing multifamily housing on Maxwell, serve a high school and a middle school, and provide a connection to some of the neighborhoods along Echo Hollow and Elmira directly with destinations such as Fred Meyer and some of the other commercial areas around on River Road. This is right now folks can make this connection, but they have to travel almost to downtown in order to do this, and this allows us to put a very strong route destination on Route 40 as well. This allows us to again attract more riders, opening new markets that do not exist right now. In the long term, we'd also be looking at extending Route 13. Route 13 is an excellent performing route, but toward the end of Route 13 in Springfield, the current route alignment ends about a quarter mile away from Walmart. And this is a high ridership stop. There's shopping carts sometimes located at this stop, showing how people are actually pushing their wares to access the service, LT Route 13 in particular. And so this recommendation would look at directly serving the Walmart, as well as directly serving the new growth that's happening at Marcola Meadows. There's high density or multifamily housing happening in this area, and we felt like a direct connection to downtown Eugene is something that is viable from a market perspective. And by adding Walmart, new housing, multifamily housing, we can increase the viability and increase what's already a successful route and make it even better. We'd also look at improving the frequency for this route to every 15 minutes. This is another one of those corridors that has strong ridership, lots of activity centers along it, both residential and commercial. And we feel like it can support the mix. This mix of land use can support more frequency, and we're looking at doing that as a part of this effort. So you've heard what was the frequency improvements. You've seen the alignments, the routes that had alignment changes, and the vast majority of the improvements that we're looking at here is actually looking at frequency enhancements. Hopefully you've seen that we looked at minor tweaks to several routes, in some cases little extensions to serve new growth. But overall, we're looking at building upon the success of the existing service. And we've been doing at this process for 6 or 7 months right now. We've gone through and talked to riders, had outreach. We've looked at what the strengths and weaknesses of the existing services are. we've looked at, having the community tell us what they'd like to see improved as well. What we heard, what we saw is reflected in the recommendations and the concepts you see that we just walked through right now. And now we're at a point where, again, it's our turn to listen, our turn to understand, is what we put together, we feel that reflects what we heard and what we saw. And this is your opportunity to tell us, did we hit the mark? And so we're at the third round of community outreach right now, where we're trying to understand, are these recommendations, are these concepts something that you'd like to see move forward? So I've got one last slide here. We're looking for you to provide input for this. We've got a website, ltdsystemreview.org. It provides a lot of information. It provides a series of individual detail for individual service enhancements on a route by route level, as well as a system level. There's, you'll see if you go to ltdsystemreview.org, you'll see, share your thoughts, and it leads you to a survey that allows you to share your thoughts on, is this good? Is this not so good? Where do I stand on this? And you can look at that from both, provide comments for both a system level as well as drill down to an individual route level and say, I don't like what you did with this route, or I do like what you did with this route. Tell us where we hit the mark. As importantly, tell us where we didn't hit the mark. It's something that we'd like to see. If you'd like to do that, link standalone is www.surveymonkey.com /r/capital N 7 Y 8 K X. Last, you can provide feedback by going to systemreview@ltd.org and email us comments about this or any other thoughts that you might have on this process. We'd love to hear from you. In the end, we want to ensure that this plan reflects community values, and this is a way that you can help make that happen. Thank you so much for listening, and we want to open it up to Q&A if anybody has any questions.
Thanks, Thomas. Do we have any questions or comments? Got nothing in the Q&A. Is it Kathy and Shaquall? Do either of you have any questions or comments?
Hello?
Hi, Kathy, we can hear you.
Yeah, so I would like to say thank you. Before the pandemic started, I had gone to the open house that LTD had put on when they were looking at some major changes. And honestly, I lost trust in the organization. And I really appreciate you doing this presentation tonight, the thought you're putting in. And I ride the 24, which I really depend on. And I'm so relieved that you're not looking at cutting it or making it take an hour to get into downtown. So thank you.
Yeah, you bet. 24 is one of our higher ridership. We know it's important to be out there. So we're building on the strengths of the system and not looking to make huge changes. So I appreciate that. I have a question that says, for smaller rural areas, didn't LTD have 35-foot buses that they could fit in those areas, right? We did have smaller buses. Those smaller buses were used on our Breeze route. If anybody remembers the Breeze that ran from U of O to Eugene Station to Valley River, and that was every 15-minute route. We use that primarily for those pieces, for those buses, for that route specifically. Really, the size of the bus isn't necessarily the problem. 35-foot bus and a 40-foot bus are still 10 feet wide. So we have problems running down local streets. Eugene and Springfield both have local street widths that are 10 feet only. And then when you take into account our mirrors and people's parking habits, it makes it difficult to travel down those roads without straddling the lanes, which can also be problematic. Also, as far as vehicles, The cost of service is not necessarily the vehicle type. The cost of service really has to do with the operator that we're paying to drive the vehicle. So even if we use smaller vehicles, the cost would be fairly similar. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions? Sounds like not. Well, I would encourage you to go check out the website, ltdsystemreview.org. Take a look at all those changes in the survey, or take the survey. Let us know your comments. We'd like Tom said, we do want to make sure that we are listening and hitting the mark and not missing something that we may not see, from the numbers. And again, you can always email us at systemreview@ltd.org. We will respond if you want us to, but we'd like to get as much comments as we can. Feel free to share these links with everyone that you know that rides the bus or people that even don't ride the bus. We want to hear from as many people as possible. So one last chance for questions, and then we're going to close it down. Any other questions, folks? All right, well, thank you for joining us. I appreciate it, and thanks for your comment, Kathy. And we're going to do a couple more open houses later on in June, and we'll have those events on the webpage here in the next week or so. Thanks a lot, folks.
Thank you.